yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news of the day through the papers of yesterday. Or in this case, events and things and places, as we are taking a more generalistic approach for these summer weeks. And so we're going back to 1854, when the Laxey Wheel was christened in honour of Lady Isabella, as reported in the wonderful book Here is the News, an illustrated Manx history by the late great Terry Kringle, who wrote so beautifully for so long about all things Manx. He remarks there were scenes of great celebration at Laxey today when a giant water wheel, the biggest in Europe, perhaps the world, officially set in motion by the Governor, the Honourable Charles Hope. The wheel has been designed and built for the great Laxey Mining Company and will be used to keep the extensive mine workings in the village pumped dry of water. It was Wednesday the 24th of September and there was that fine late summer weather for the occasion. 4,000 people from all over the island gathered in Glenmore in Laxey. In addition to the Governor and Lady Hope, the company invited the Lord Bishop, members of the legislature, government officials and the gentry. Not the commoners, of course. The principal guests started arriving from 11 in the morning. The Governor came at midday. At the same time, nearly 600 people in their holiday attire, led by the chairman of the directors of the Laxey Mining Company, Mr. George W. Dumbell, and the mines agent, Captain Richard Rowe, marched in procession from the washing floors up to the glen to the wheel. The assembly watched the Governor turn on the water, which set the mighty wheel in motion, after which it was christened Lady Isabella with a bottle of champagne by Mrs. Dumbell in honour of the Governor's wife. The moment greeted by a firing of a cannon and the unfurling of a flag on the top of the wheel structure. And after that, the official party ascended the spiral staircase, still there of course, to the viewing platform, remarking that there was not the least tremor from the wheel beneath their feet. Meanwhile, sounds like a good party this, tables were laid with beef, potatoes and ale, with ginger beer and milk for the totalists, i.e. the non-drinkers. All sounds good to me, it must be said. It was all out in the open and there for the work people as well. There was a blessing by Bishop Powis and the people gave 3 cheers for the Governor and Captain Rowe. Afterwards, there were games for them where the principal guests retired to a wooden pavilion for a sumptuous repast. They didn't partake of the ale and beer then, presumably. During the speech-making afterwards, Captain Rowe said, but for Mr. Dumbell and the company, the Glen of Laxey will be silent and 600 miners and their families would be seeking employment elsewhere, perhaps as far afield as Australia. The use of the new wheel, which is capable of pumping 250 gallons of water a minute from the mine workings, is expected to increase output. The total credit for the design of the Colossus goes to a 37-year-old Manx engineer, Mr. Robert Casement, a native of Lazaire. The company has presented him with a cheque for £50 in recognition of his efforts. Hopefully he got paid as well. Still there, recently renovated. More work to be done, I believe, on the renovation front, though I haven't been out for a while. It looks good from a distance, it has to be said. 1854, apparently, the year that smuggling finally disappeared from the island as well. The last vestiges of the old smuggling trade in the Isle of Man have finally been wiped out after well over a century. Treasury officials said it was a direct result of last year's British government's decision to bring Manx duties on spirits and tobacco up to English levels. So there was no point in smuggling anymore. It was the sheer size of the smuggling trade that led to the revestment of 1765, but the Mischief Act never succeeded in eradicating it as long as there was an imbalance of duties in the island, which continued until last year. Officials said with no profit to be taken, there was no point in the so-called running trade continuing. That's always the way, isn't it? Follow the money, as they say, then as now. Surprisingly, perhaps not surprisingly, it's reported there was a decline in drunkenness in the island. It's claimed the increase in local spirit duty has resulted in a sharp decrease in drunkenness on the Isle of Man. At the same time, the duty on tea has been reduced considerably, bringing about a marked change in social habits from ale to tea. Tynwald now plans to introduce a Taverns Act in 3 years' time to effect further control. The cost of licence fees recognizances paid by public house landlords will be greatly increased and Sunday opening will be banned. It was for some time, I think, wasn't it? The number of public houses in the island is already falling from 460 12 years ago to just under 300 nowadays, that being 1854. What's the number now, I wonder? I can't recall. And finally, town commissioners were coming in 1854. Tynwald has announced steps leading towards the election of town commissioners to take over municipal control in the town of Douglas. It follows demands by townspeople for civic improvements befitting the principal town and port of the island. It's hoped that legislation will soon be implemented for the election of 9 commissioners with extensive powers of action. There are now around 1,700 houses in the town, and the commissioners will have power to impose rates on property up to a maximum of 2 shillings in the pound. A quick look at 1854 on the island. The Laxey Wheel started work for the first time. Smuggling disappeared for the last time, as far as I'm aware. And drunkenness, well, perhaps that hasn't disappeared. Not totally, in any case, particularly at weekends and if it's nice weather. Whichever way you look at it, it's all old news to a degree, isn't it? That's it for this week. Check out the podcast, of course. See you next week. Cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.